I was able to stack up 16,142 points for damage any arc enemies during a night raid on damn Battlegrounds. Now I did technically fail to extract, but that's only because my snap hook decided to throw me under the bus during the last minute and a half of this
No.
round. The strategy itself is still solid for stacking up a similar amount of points. Now for my equipment, I brought in a Jupiter with 5 stacks of ammo, a Hole Cracker with 7 stacks of ammo, 5 deadlines, 1 wolf pack, 2 stacks of herbal bandages, 2 stacks of shield rechargers, 1 stack of adrenaline shots, but I also brought a stack of chemicals and a stack of plastic parts so I could make more adrenaline shots as I needed them on top side. Now every component of this setup essentially has a role for the enemies that you're going to deal with on damn Battlegrounds. Now once you spawn in, you want to head for the Bombardier or the Bastions on the map. These tend to give you the highest volume of points for taking them out and dealing damage to them. Since I spawned deep behind the testing annex, my focus was getting to the Bombardier first. Now you can definitely decide to take Rocketeers out on the way if you want, but in general at the start of the round, especially if you're trying to control the match itself, you want to try and get the rotations on the bigger arc enemies before other players can get there. This then lets you to have the actual timer for when they're going to come back, and you can essentially control the match by then rotating out to the respawns as they come back in. Only you at that point will know the cycle, and it helps you to control the eliminations for the rest of the match. So I did pass by a Rocketeer, but I picked it up later and just went to focus on the Bombardier. Now Bombardiers are curiously fragile. They're actually very, very easy to take out with just a hole cracker. I wouldn't recommend spending any sort of a heavier explosive on the Bombardiers because it essentially only takes 2.5 magazines of the hole cracker to take it out. And if you focus your fire onto the legs of the Bombardier and you immobilize it, it makes it even easier to just stack up that damage and to minimize the threat that the Bombardier really has. The Bombardier that I was fighting only got to get off one of its mortar shots, and after that, it was already eliminated, and it was just simply from the hole cracker itself. You want to save your heavier explosives for the more dangerous enemies that you're going to come across. So once I took out the Bombardier, the next rotation for me was to the Bastions. Now there's a zip line that goes down from the dam to the swamp area, so I took that to get myself down to that area. Now, before you do fight Bastion in the swamp, you need to make sure that you're fighting it from a place of cover and make sure you've cleared out that area inside of any enemies that are lingering around. You don't want them to come up behind you when you're focused on the Bastion. Now, before you start fighting this Bastion, make sure that you have one deadline equipped to your quick use. The strategy here is pretty simple. You essentially want to damage Bastion so it aggroes to you, but then you need to be patient and let it walk as close to you as possible because you want to minimize the amount that you have to run in order to place a deadline once you immobilize it. So just like with the Bombardier, you want to use your hole cracker and target its legs, and taking out one of its legs will essentially immobilize it for 10 full seconds. Once it's immobilized, you essentially want to sprint out, equip your deadline, jump on the top of Bastion, and make sure that you place the deadline in the center of its head. There's a small circular armor plate, and you want to make sure that the deadline goes on top of that. As long as it's placed in the center of Bastion's head, the deadline will one-shot Bastion. If you place it anywhere else on the top of Bastion, there's a possibility that the deadline won't do enough damage to actually take Bastion fully out. So it is really important to make sure to put the deadline in the right place on Bastion. Now, as I was trying to leave the Hydrodomes to head for the Pipeline Bastion, I did pull aggro on a Rocketeer, and I got diffed by a snitch just a little bit. I could not hit my shot to save my life, and I've missed a couple of very easy shots on the snitch. In general, when I'm fighting Rocketeers, I recommend not fighting it from a single entry point. Rocketeers will be able to hit those rockets extremely accurately inside of doorways, which makes it a not awesome place to take a fight. But in a pinch, if you essentially know how to poke your head out, take your shot, and then immediately run back into cover, you can essentially get into a rhythm that makes the Rocketeer miss its rockets while you're also able to deal the damage. Now for the Rocketeers, I recommend using the Jupiter, and as you are using the Jupiter, just aim for center mass. Right where the red light is on the front of the Rocketeer, just put your shots right into that. As long as you continuously hit the main part of the body, you will wear it down super quick. It really only takes about 2 magazines to fully take out a Rocketeer. Now, once the Rocketeer was eliminated, I tried to rotate up to the Pipeline Bastion, and there's a great place to place a zip line right at the edge of the swamp that lets you get up to the Pipeline Tower really easily. Now, once I got to the Pipeline Tower, the Bastion was already engaged. It was basically already eliminated by another player. So instead of going for that, I just rotated to the top of the pipeline tower. Now the top of the pipeline tower is one of my favorite places to go for farming Rocketeers. You can see essentially 4 or 5 Rocketeer spawns from this location. Additionally, this spot also lets you pick off some Vaporizers. Now as you are fighting Vaporizers, I recommend putting a wolf pack in your quick use, and then using the Jupiter to essentially deal poke damage to aggro it to you. Use the Jupiter essentially up into the point where the Vaporizer is within close enough range for a wolf pack to work, and then hit it with the Jupiter enough that it uses its shield. Once it casts its shield, pull out your wolf pack and essentially wait for the shield to go away. And then the second it drops its shield, let that wolf pack go. And in most cases, it will take out the Vaporizer in a single go. For whatever reason, when I hit the Rocketeer that was over by the testing annex multiple times, it was just like kind of freaking out and didn't know who to track to. I think there might have been a raider in the area that it was kind of looking at, but nobody else was dealing damage to it. So I think it just got a little bit confused, and it took me a little bit to get this one pulled over. But that's the benefit of being up on the pipeline tower when things don't go a little bit weird, is that you can pull the Rocketeers from across the map, and then you have a really nice and safe location to fight them from. Not only are you mostly safe from Raider sightlines, but you also have 2 giant pieces of cover that work really well for fighting Rocketeers. And in general, if you hit them from a far enough away distance, they tend to not aggro right away, so you can get free shots on them while they're just kind of floating there in the air, taking the damage from you. Now, essentially what you want to do on top of the pipeline tower is just continue to work through Rocketeers as you see them on the map, and then watch for the spotters to respawn for the Bombardier. Once you see the spotters come back by the primary facility, you're essentially going to repeat your rotation from the start of the game. I recommend using zip lines to get across from the pipeline tower to the primary facility. Ziplining down and then back up cuts the run in half, and it makes it really easy to get there quick. Now, once it gets to about halfway through the match, keep in mind that turbines will spawn in. It can be any number of turbines from 1 to 3 as far as I know. Now in this match, there was only a single turbine, and the deadlines that I brought in was intended for the turbine overall. Now for fighting the turbines, there's essentially 2 different rules of thought. If it's on the ground and no raiders are aggroing to it, you want to try and deadline it. Now this can be a very dangerous process because it lays out mines all around it, and once you get within a decent proximity of like 10 meters, those mines will start to detonate, and they deal massive amounts of damage. So you got to be careful when you're going for that. But if there's also players that are already engaged with it, you do not have the opportunity to deadline. So the idea there is that you essentially just want to use your hole cracker or your Jupiter to apply damage to it from range. Now outside of that, there isn't a ton more to this challenge. Once you've stacked up enough points and you're happy with your score, head back to Speranza, collect any loot if you haven't already, and watch your score fly up the leaderboard. That's going to be it for me today, y'all. Thanks for watching.